All right, welcome back, folks. So we have passed the halfway point of our training, and we're so glad to welcome you back for another day. To start us out today, we'd like to take a minute to check in with you. Where is your interest pulling you? Was there anything you dwelled on since the last time we connected? Do you have any questions for presenters or even any rhetorical questions that you'd like to share right now? So let's take a moment to give everyone some space to share their thoughts. Feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts to the chat. And yeah, we'll just take a few more moments to, yeah, just check in with you all, see how you're doing.
Well, I'll go. I think this is great information. I'm really excited to for our team to find a way to roll it out to producers throughout Kentucky, and interested in hearing about Module 3 and 4.
Great, thank you for sharing, Jackie, and thank you for joining us. All right, well, not seeing or hearing anymore, so we'll move on to today's agenda. Moving on to day 3, we will continue our module deep dive with modules 3, 4, and our conclusion in store. We'll then move on to breakout sessions throughout the day, so you'll have some space to brainstorm with your state team again, and hopefully work towards some of the initial logistical planning for a producer event in the future. Before I hand it over to our next speaker, I want to ask you all to just take a moment to rename yourselves in the Zoom meeting, and rename yourself with include your state abbreviation if you could. If this were an in-person event, you would have name tags with your organization and state on display. So this is just the next best thing we can do, and our way of just sharing where we all come from in this virtual platform we're on now. So just take a quick moment to change your name. I've changed mine. I'm from Illinois, so you'll see my abbreviations there. Great. Alrighty. Well, right now we have with us our next guest speaker, the Southeast Regional Director of the National Center for Appropriate Technology, Margot Hale. Margot, take it away.
All right, thanks, Tomas. Good to see you all again. Glad to be with you today. I was able to join yesterday and got a chance to visit with a few of you. So I am Margot Hale, and as Tomas said, I am NCAT's Southeast Regional Director based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. But I have worked all across the Southeast. To give you just a little bit of background about myself and wondering why the heck I'm talking to you guys today. I've been a part of this team that has helped develop this curriculum through the Bringing the Farm to School program. And here in Arkansas and across the Southeast, I've worked with farmers for many years doing farmer trainings and helping farmers identify markets. Here in Arkansas, I supervised the Food Corps Arkansas program for a number of years. And so in that role, I had a chance to, connect with many schools across the state and help them as they were developing their farm to school programs. And then also just all my years of work with farmers and helping them access markets. So I'm going to go ahead and hopefully correctly share my screen. All right, hopefully you guys can see that. Okay. So diving into module 3 is choosing the right product to sell. And in the previous modules, we learned about learning about all of the different programs and ways that farmers might access school markets. And we learned about, narrowing down their marketing channels and how their products might enter schools, what Robert talked about yesterday. This module will help producers have a better understanding of how their products fit onto the plate and help producers really determine the types of products that are a good fit with their chosen school market. So we'll talk about school capacity and other factors that influence what products really are a good fit for farmers to sell to a school. The second part of this module also talks about any product adaptation or maybe some further processing that may be needed and how producers can identify that and take those steps to meet the needs of the school buyers. So once again, orienting you guys to the facilitator guide and the producer workbook, just like the presentations yesterday. I'll reference the pages in the facilitator guide and the producer workbook so you can follow along and get familiar with that. The module 3 materials start on page 65 of the facilitator guide and in page 26 of the producer workbook. So, you'll notice there are a few differences. Obviously, the producer workbook really is just honed in on a few of the main points that we want the producers to focus on. And we will go through the worksheets and some of the materials covered in the producer workbook. Obviously, the facilitator guide includes more details, such as the training materials, suggested activities, and then some of those further resources. On page 14 of the facilitator guide is the curriculum map for module 3. And you may remember yesterday we showed the curriculum map for the first 2 modules. And this just gives you a high-level overview of the content. And so you can refer to this to get acquainted with the materials in your facilitator guide and kind of see all of the content that is there for this module. It outlines the activities and the worksheets that are located in the producer workbook. And as I mentioned, this module contains 2 sections, and it gives you an overview of both these sections, as well as the activities and supplemental case studies. And I will be sharing a few of those case study videos with you in this presentation. So for module 3, these are the main learning objectives. As mentioned, module 2 really discussed about meeting with your school nutrition director and how that can help you identify the types of products and maybe the ways that products will enter the school market. This module really kind of dives a little bit deeper into that and discusses school cooking infrastructure and how school district capacity, the programs that they participate in, going back to that module 1 of all of those different programs and seeing how different schools, different programs might allow different opportunities for producers. And then just the school needs and how that influences the types of products that a producer can sell to a school district. Section B of this module helps producers think about really moving their product from the field to schools, and once again, if any further processing is needed. So the learning objectives for module 3 are to understand how products fit into school meal menus, identifying those products and the quantities that are a best fit, and then identifying how your products can be adapted to meet the needs of the school, and exploring how product pricing and production costs can help determine the best product for school markets. And we will introduce the pricing and production costs just a little bit in module 3, but really we take a deep dive into that in module 4, which Andy and Tammy will be sharing with you later. So some background information for module 3, this can be found on page 65 and 66 of the facilitator guide. And this just gives you as the trainer some core concepts to be familiar with. It gives you some resources that I'll mention here in the presentation, but just some resources that maybe you want to dig into before you teach this module or teach components of this module. And then also those case studies that you can use. And also, as was encouraged yesterday, we really encourage you to, find examples in your state, in your region, and highlight those to support the materials in this module. Okay, so for module 3, we are saying it takes about 30 minutes to present this section of materials. And really, we're going to start off by introducing the general topic, kind of like I just did, and the flow of the module. And the module starts off by discussing how to choose the right product based on the kitchen capacities of the district the producers are selling to. So the different, capacities of schools, how they have their, their food environment set up, how they have their kitchens set up, whether it be a central kitchen, or they're doing, from scratch cooking in each of the schools, or, as Robert mentioned yesterday, I mean, maybe they have it hired out to a third party company. So it is really important for producers to get some of this information and really understand how the schools, work and the capacities they have, because that greatly influences the types of products that they're going to buy. So really just thinking through, some of those concepts, what current products a school is using that a local producer might be able to provide. And, when you start, you might have some producers in your group that maybe are already selling to a school. And if you have those producers in your group, you definitely need to rely on their experience and have them share their experiences and the products that they are selling. The other producers will learn a lot from that. But some producers, might come to a training with a certain product in mind that they think they would like to sell to a school, or maybe they hope to sell to a school. And so definitely let everybody share and acknowledge that. And that's actually a really good thing for them to think about as we go through the rest of the module, so they can have those particular products in mind. Definitely this is a good time to tie in the concepts taught in modules 1 and 2. Once again, those different feeding programs, how they have their, their programs set up, the number of kids they're serving, whether they use distributors or not. All of those things are important concepts for them to think about as we are really evaluating a school's capacity and what products would be a good fit for a farmer. So after you briefly discuss kitchen capacity and, possibly what good products might be that would fit based on that capacity, this slide shows producers how easy it is to look at a district's menu to see if their product might be a good fit. So it's pretty easy to find the menus for schools. They typically, post them on their website and are pretty easy to find. So they can look there and just look at the types of products that are already being served at their local school or their districts around them. And that'll give them an idea of the types of products that, could be potentials for them to sell to that district. So, really advise producers that using this menu is a good tool, a good starting place, because especially if a school is just getting started with farm to school, the easiest thing for them to do is to substitute a product they're already using with a local product. They're not going to have to change recipes. They're not going to have to come up with new ways to serve it. It can be an easy, across the board substitution. And then, even if a farmer's not able to maybe meet the whole capacity, it's a product they can easily get from their distributor to fill that gap, or, whatever the situation may be. So start simple by looking at the menus, seeing what they're already serving, and seeing if they produce a local substitution for what's already on the school menu. Once again, it's real easy to substitute a local apple for just, whatever apple that they were serving before from their distributor. This is a great, in this slide, this is a great way to provide some regionalization to the slides. So once again, finding those local menus or, from schools in your area, schools that maybe are represented in your training, your workshop or whatever you're hosting. It's a great way to make that local connection. And, looking at different size school districts, in a certain area, just seeing the variability in the different menus, I think is an interesting activity, and really lets producers just remember back to, what is served at schools, and getting ideas of things that are on the menu that they could be producing or already are producing. So, I understand that it's kind of an intimidating process to think about, especially if you've never done if a producer has never really sold wholesale or large volumes. It can be very intimidating. So encourage producers not to be intimidated by the volume requirements. These volume requirements, they might be listed on a solicitation, or really, I think many school nutrition directors will work with producers to help them understand, what the volume that they're looking for and how that equates back to, pounds or cases or whatever it may be of how a farmer is providing those products to the school. So, really encourage producers to consider translating those volume requirements from pounds to meals or servings. And there are a couple of slides in the slide deck and working through a problem of translating. The example given is carrot sticks, and translating that from pounds to the volume requirements. And one of the tools that's listed in the Facilitator guide and on these slides is the USDA Food Buying Guide. And it gives some breakdowns of, the volume requirements. And there's an opportunity to, see how pounds equates to number of servings, and kind of speaking the same language. I think we talked about it yesterday, is like, farmers and school food, they kind of speak different languages. So making sure that those volumes we're talking about the same thing, or are getting it in a format that makes sense to both. So, once again, working with a school nutrition director to understand the volumes of products that are needed, and, what are the options for smaller volumes? Maybe we're not providing enough carrots to serve to every student for, lunch in a week, but, maybe we're doing maybe there's opportunity for a taste test, or maybe it's something that can be provided in smaller amounts and, featured in a recipe or something like that. So, there are ways to be creative and alter the volume requirements, or kind of work around that. And once again, especially getting started, think about those different ways, instead of, coming in and fully replacing a product on the entire menu for the entire year. The next few slides in this module break down the different types of kitchens and cooking infrastructure that, may be present in the schools. And once again, this looks different in schools and districts, and it really just depends. So this is one of those pieces that, when Robert yesterday talked about kind of making that relationship with the school nutrition director, and this is one of those questions to get answered, to find out this information of really what is the kitchen capacity, at the school or the districts that I'm interested in selling to. Because once again, what they have the ability to do, whether it be do some processing or from scratch cooking, or, what equipment they use to cook or prepare food, really makes a difference on the types of products that they're gonna be able to buy. I do want to mention salad bars. Salad bars typically have been a wonderful way for local producers to get their products into schools because it can be smaller amounts. It, maybe doesn't necessarily have to be a consistent supply, but schools are able to, cut things up and put them out on the salad bars. Obviously, COVID greatly impacted salad bars. And I think most schools, did away with salad bars, at least this past year. So hopefully they'll come back because that is a really great entry point. And I know many schools, that's a great way that they start by incorporating some local product because it's easy to put out what you have, before taking the step of incorporating it into a recipe or menu item. But just want to make that note. Hopefully salad bars will make their way back into our schools. The next couple of slides, slide 13 talks about how certain crops will require a continuous harvest, and others are a good fit because there's, one harvest, one and done. So the picture shows here, bins of sweet potatoes. And so this can be a really great option for a farmer because they can, they harvest all their sweet potatoes and they can deliver it, and then the school can use it as needed. This only works if a school has the capacity to receive a delivery of that size and also store them and also, further process those sweet potatoes. So once again, sweet potatoes might be a great option if the school has capacity to handle that product. Some schools might not be set up to be able to do that. So then sweet potatoes wouldn't be a good option. So once again, it's learning what the schools have capacity for, what space and storage requirement, the cooking facilities and things like that. So then the final slide in this section includes tips for producers that are just getting started in school sales. And, maybe their produce doesn't fit into a formal solicitation process, but as I mentioned, there are creative ways to get local products into a school. So maybe it's, special events, a harvest of the month, maybe it's a one-time event. Maybe there are taste tests. I think in our North Carolina breakout group yesterday, someone mentioned how taste tests have been so successful across the state. And that is a great way to get, smaller amounts one time, let a producer make that connection with a school and start to develop that relationship. And, taste tests are obviously a great way to get the kids involved too, and, create some buy-in and excitement for those local products from the students. And also, there are opportunities not just through school food in the cafeteria setting, but also in classroom lessons. So, maybe a teacher is doing a lesson on fermentation and wants to buy a bunch of cucumbers to pickle or something like that, or, cabbage to make sauerkraut. So, making those connections with schools or teachers or, parent-teacher groups, things like that. It doesn't always have to be directly through, school nutrition director or, product going straight into the cafeteria. There are other ways to start making those connections and getting local products into schools. All right, the next slide in the presentation is an excerpt from a full video case study that is available on the website where all the case studies are linked. And this case study is from Ali Marachek in Fayetteville, Arkansas, Fayetteville Public Schools. And she talks about some tips for producers as they are wanting to, approach and work with a school nutrition director. And I'm going to go ahead and play this clip for y'all so you can hear. Once again, this is a small excerpt from a fuller case study. I'm going to have to stop here.
Yeah, well, I would say number one, bring samples. You will have, a lot more luck with the child nutrition director when you bring them something tasty to eat, and also so you can showcase how different the flavor might be, or bring some different varieties that maybe they've never seen before. They're used to seeing that from their brokers, so to kind of align with that would be great. Also, come to the conversation knowing what you need for your farm operation, just so that they can plan accordingly and you can decide together whether it's a good market for your operation. Mm-hmm. So probably the quickest and most simple explanation for how we manage purchasing relationships with growers is through a bid process, and the type of bidding you do depends on how much you're likely going to buy from the grower, but we have early conversations and we are allowed to share previous pricing or current pricing with the grower so they can see if that pricing is something similar might work for their business, and then they can decide whether they participate in our bidding solicitation, all of that we're required to do. So you can have initial conversations about price before that happens. You can't tell them the price to put down, but it's just, it's open information that anyone could request. And we primarily purchase directly from growers. We have a district warehouse that we can receive the items at, so the growers make one delivery, but we do very little local purchasing through a distributor or other sort of third party. It's direct from the producer.
All right. So you can, see from that clip from Allie how she, talked about a few of those capacity issues that the slides covered. So I would say that, obviously you can use this case study, this video in your presentation. But if you have a local child nutrition director or someone that works in the cafeteria setting to come and share some of those things about the local districts, that would be a great way to bring in that the regionalization and making it really applicable for the farmers that you're going to be training. Okay. All right, so the next activity in this module is a school menu brainstorm. And this is slide 16 of this deck. And for this activity, producers will have the opportunity to spend some time looking at a menu. There are some sample menus in the back of the producer workbook, pages 114 through 116. Or, as I mentioned earlier, consider bringing a menu from your region or several from your region or your state, and let producers really look at those menus and let them brainstorm what products might be a good fit to sell to schools, what's already on those menus that they can provide a substitute for, and let them do some brainstorming about products that would be a good fit, and maybe products that would be a good fit based on information they know, whether it be the receiving and storage capacity of the school district, the cooking capacity of the school district, volume requirements, and things like that. So in the producer workbook on page 27, there's this little table where they can spend some time just brainstorming ideas. Once again, I think, first and foremost, identifying the products on a menu that they are already growing or that they could grow or would be interested in growing is a great first step. So the second section of module 3 focuses on how producers can alter their products if needed to meet school cooking or processing limitations, or just to meet the needs of a school. Trainers will help producers understand the different types of processing, from raw product, for example, raw carrots, to lightly processed, such as carrot coins, to a high value added products such as, a parboiled product or dried or frozen product. So these slides talk a little bit about the processing process, processing options. And then another important point we want trainers to make in this section is that it can be very expensive to add processing infrastructure to a farm. So it might be a better option to connect with regional processing centers or other buyers that might do the processing for you. So once again, you're the local expert in your region and your state. So hopefully you know about some of those processing options, whether it be shared use kitchens or university programs or whatever it may be that producers might be able to access to do some further processing. And for those producers who are interested in investing in infrastructure, there are a few slides on financing and funding for farmers to, retrofit their operation or to add that processing capacity on their farm. Any of you guys who work with farmers always know the question is, are there grants for that? Is there funding? So we have a slide on that, but definitely be aware of that as a trainer. As I said earlier, I work with producers all over the country, and that is always their question about everything is, is there money for that? And then finally, the last section of section B of module 3 gets producers to start thinking about the cost of getting their farm product to the buyer. Once again, this will be covered much more in depth in module 4, but this, starts getting them to think about that. So this section of module 3, we estimate about 30 minutes to get through this content. So in this section, you'll start off by reminding producers that the school capacity will dictate the types of products and the level of processing required. Really, it just comes down to the individual school districts or schools and, what they can handle and the types of products that they, will buy. So it's a good time to ask producers to think about the capacity discussion that, was covered in the earlier section of module 3 and, how this might affect processing. Slides 19 and 20 discuss light processing, mainly of fruits and vegetables, and what that level of processing means exactly. And, through an initial meeting with the child nutrition director, producers can ask about processing capacity and cooking infrastructure at school. So once again, this is some of that information that's gained in that initial, relationship building conversation of, making that relationship with the school and determining their capacity and their needs. Because, some schools do have capacity to do some processing, of raw product there in their kitchens. Some, for example, in Fayetteville Public Schools, Allie, who we just saw in the video, they work in processing into some of their regular kitchen routines and, process and, freeze and preserve things to use throughout the year. So, some schools might have that capacity, some won't. So it's just important to learn that information directly from the schools that producers are interested in working with. The next couple of slides discuss processing for meat and other high value added products, such as pre-cooked fruits and vegetables. And these products really, these are the ones that require extensive infrastructure and, probably are not going to be added on a producer's farm. These are probably best left to a processing kitchen or a meat processor, but definitely, for producers to be aware of. Maybe there's an opportunity a school would really like to, purchase preformed patties, and a farmer can work with their meat processor to have that product made for a school. So just getting them thinking about, further processing. And once again, that conversation with the school nutrition director and what are the needs of the school, where, what's something a local producer can kind of fill a gap and make their product, valuable to a school. As I mentioned, this is going to be a time where it'll be helpful for you as a trainer to be familiar with state or regional examples of value-added processing, and then of course the financing piece. Producers are also going to have many questions about processing rules and regulations. Once again, in working with producers, they're going to want to know, what are the rules? If I chop something up, does that require an inspection? Do I have to have a license to do that? Once again, a lot of these things are, really state dependent, and sometimes even down to, local health departments and, local inspections and things like that. So once again, you as a trainer in your state or in your region, you'll be more familiar with these requirements. Just be prepared that producers are probably going to ask these questions. So, knowing about what options are in their area to have processing done, what are the regulations if they want to do any sort of processing themselves, a light process, and then if there are funding options available. So in the next few slides, there are really a lot of options for regionalization. This is the time that you can highlight those regional processing kitchens in your area. You can, highlight if there are any farm to school grantees in your state or in your region that have used grants to do some further processing. This is a great opportunity to highlight those success stories and to bring in those farmers or those partners to talk about their process. That would be a great opportunity. And so, definitely understanding if there's, a food hub or aggregator that does processing, maybe that's an option. So just being aware of those options in your area. And then the last slide of this processing section talks about, value added is not just through processing. So there are other aspects of a local product that adds value and makes their local product more valuable than, say, something a school can get from a distributor. And so this is to get the producers thinking about how they can add value beyond just processing. So, we can say, well, as a local product, my product is extremely fresh and very high quality, fresher than being trucked in. Something else that a local producer can offer that a distributor can't offer is, a farm tour or visits to the school from a farmer to talk about their farm and their products. So, those are other ways that farmers can show that their products are valuable and can meet the needs of a school buyer. So, have producers really start thinking about that. All right. The next slide talks about the importance of timing and how schools and producers need to consider timing for processing and just school sales in general. So this slide features an excerpt of a case study with Glenn Holmes, who you heard from on Monday. I'll go ahead and play this short clip so you can get a taste of, once again, these case studies that are embedded into the training slides, and more are available on the website for you guys to use, pick and choose, and use what would be most useful to the producers you're working with, most relevant. And so let me stop share.
Another advantage, sometimes a disadvantage that small farmers have is that most of their products they produce, a lot of times they produce when school not in, or else the enrollment as with some schools is very low. Networking is critical, and being able to talk to the food director and looking at and talk with them about buying what we call fresh and frozen items. And if you can do it, locate you a local commercial freezer if possible, and try to develop a way to communicate between that commercial food freezer operation and the school. That way she know it is a certified facility that can hold frozen food. And that may be a way for you to be able to get more variety of product into that school system.
All right, once again, in that 50-second clip, Mr. Holmes hit on a few of the things that we have covered in this module so far about timing. That's always a problem. We're growing most of our at least fresh fruits and vegetables when students are not in school, or not as many of them. The access to he mentioned commercial freezer capacity. And, as I mentioned, being familiar with what processing, or, in that case, freezer capacity is available in your state or in your region. And to kind of address the capacity of storage too, freezer storage, maybe a school doesn't have ability to store a lot of product. And maybe there are options that they can work with, in their local community. And, yesterday, hearing Robert talk about, he knows schools that use the local grocery store as kind of that place to handle some of that storage and sorting and things like that. That was interesting to me. So once again, you guys know what is happening in your region and your state, and we hope that you can, highlight the successes and share that with producers so they can see a way to make this work for them. The next few slides walk producers through some of the costs to consider in doing processing. I mean, it's not just the cost of it. There's equipment involved. I mean, there's time and transportation and labor and, opportunity cost. I mean, could they be spending their time doing something else that would make them more money? So there are a lot of things to consider if producers are, thinking about adding a little bit of processing to their products. And in these slides, there's another producer spotlight that features meat processing. So once again, if you are doing a training for livestock producers, this might be a great case study to share with that group. If you're working with vegetable producers, maybe it's not so relevant. So you can pick and choose which spotlight based on the producer audience would be the best fit. And then finally, slide 30 features a list of potential grant and low interest loan funds for investing in infrastructure and processing capacity on a producer's farm. That material is also available in the producer workbook in the Digging Deeper section, so that they have that information there in their workbook as well. And then, if you know of any local or state-based programs to fund processing or, fund any equipment or capacity like that, please mention those to the producers. So there are a couple of other producer spotlights available. Once again, you can play all of them or choose the ones that are a good fit based on your audience, or in my opinion, maybe even better is bringing in a local producer who has successfully navigated this process. Maybe you have a local producer who, has done some processing or is successfully selling to a school, and really bringing them in and letting them share their experience for the other producers to hear is a great opportunity. The next activity in this module is about giving a values pitch. So in this activity, you will ask producers to turn to their neighbor and give them a values pitch. and this is what really sets their product apart from a similar product that a school could get from a wholesale distributor. So, why should a school choose their local product over what they can get from a distributor? So, plan for about 10 minutes or so for this activity. And we are going to do this activity right now. So see if you guys are all awake, if you've had enough coffee, if you're paying attention. We are going to break into pairs, and Tracy is going to randomly assign you a partner. And we're going to do these matchups and spend some time discussing values beyond processing that producers in your region might be able to bring to a school buyer. So I don't know if we happen to have any producers in this group. If you're a producer, you can think about yourself and what you might say. Or for those of you who work with producers, maybe think about, maybe you have a particular producer in mind who the farm to school would be a good market for them. And, what can they pitch? What can they tell a school that adds value to their product or makes their product stand out against what they could get from a distributor? So I want you guys, the pairs, you both can share, you can talk about it, talk about what makes a local product better than the rest. And when we come back, I might ask a couple of you guys to share what you talked about. Maybe you had some good ideas. I want to hear some good, innovative answers. And, maybe there's some state or regional values or, things that can come out in this. So I want to hear your creative answers. So Tracy, you can do the magic of sending people to their pairs to talk about their values pitch. And I think we set this at 10 minutes. So that will give each person plenty of time to share what they think would be valuable to share with the school.
Hey folks, hopefully you all were able to go take care of yourself in that brief 5-minute break. And we're going to get started with digging into Module 4. And I am happy to be presenting with my friend and colleague, Andy Pressman from New Hampshire. And I'll let him introduce himself and then I'll start sharing our screen.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. And hello, everybody. I'm Andy Pressman, and as Tammy mentioned, I am with NCAT in the Northeast region. I'm based out of New Hampshire, and yeah, really pleased to be here today. Been part of this training team and developing the resources as well. And yeah, so I just actually got to join the Kentucky breakout group, which was really great. And a lot of the sort of components we talked about in terms of needs are really what's covered in Module 4. So I'm excited to share with you Module 4 and all that goes into it. It's a big module. So we'll dive in here in a little bit. Yeah, so thanks, Tammy. And like I just said, it's great to be with everyone. Tammy's going to show a few slides here just to get started in Module 4. But before we get started, I just want to thank you all for all the great work you do in supporting farm to school programs, particularly in respect to the local food chain and in bringing shared values between the producers, the schools, and the students. A lot of work over the years has gone into this, and you all continue to be a huge part of keeping the shared values a priority. And so through my work with NCAT, I've had the privilege of working with producers who sell to schools. And I have a big interest in working with producers to help them plan for scaling up to institutional and intermediated markets. And this includes things like looking at a farm's cash flow and exploring what it would look like if the farm charged $3 for a head of lettuce versus $2 for a head, and how this change can impact a farm and family's holistic goals. So my work also involves a lot of crop planning, particularly with diversified vegetable operations. But most of my interest lies in understanding the relationship between farm equipment and infrastructure, and both for current and future scales of production. And so this is all part of the foundation of Module 4. And like I said, it's a big module, but we're gonna definitely take our time here through the sections, and please feel free to ask questions.
Yes, so as you can see on module 4, this is kind of the facilitator guide facing resource, which you can see on it if you have, if you're like me in your middle ages and need glasses, you can look on page 79 of the facilitator guide. The producer workbook also has very similar, but not as detailed content for you to see on page 33. So module 4 focuses on whole farm business planning, considerations for scaling up for school markets, and then digging into crop and livestock planning and production. And then finally wraps up with food safety considerations and regulations. There are a lot of tools and resources identified in this module to help producers evaluate school markets and whether or not they're a good fit for farms. So here's that what we're talking, what we're calling a curriculum map or detailed outline that you can also look at, and it will be easier for you to see if you're somebody like me on pages 15 through 16 of your facilitator guide. And as with all of the training modules, you can see, you can use this outline to get a quick glance at the core content and the core concepts. You can see that in that third column there for this module. You also see the learning objectives and training activities to help producers reinforce that it's good to familiarize yourself with those resources. So with those objectives, so you can understand what we're trying to get producers to learn in this particular module. You can also see in column 4 that this module is heavy on applied activities, and these applied activities are mainly focused on worksheets to help producers really think about that price point piece, as Caroline identified on day 1. That was one of the big things that was identified as a barrier in accessing school sales. So having producers understand what their break-even price is and working through worksheets and online resources to help them understand how to make those determinations, as well as determining what kinds of succession planting and all of that stuff needs to happen in order to meet the requirements of a school bid. So that's what this module digs into, and we'll explain in more detail throughout this presentation. So the learning objectives, we really want producers to understand and assess their capacity for selling to schools. And also, and like I had mentioned before, that price point, understand their price point. And if they do have to make some kind of infrastructure investment, what the return on investment is. And then finally, understand best practices for planning their product all the way from field to schools. So, thinking about it from backwards, from the solicitation to when they're starting to put that seed in the ground. So helping them understand the tools that can help them figure out timing and quantities and all that kind of stuff. That's what we want producers to learn, and what we dig into in Module 4. As with all of the other modules, you can go to page 80 of the Facilitator Guide. I'm going to be working through this with you. And you can see there's those core concepts that were identified in that training outline, and lots of digging deeper resources here for you to understand as trainers and to get familiar with. And a lot of these resources are actually they're embedded in the online version, so it might be a good idea to have that online version up and start looking at some of the calculator tools and stuff that we ask you as presenters to share with producers as you're training them. And Andy and I will be talking about some of those calculators and reviewing them in this presentation today. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Andy to talk about business planning for school sales.
All right, thank you, Tammy, and hopefully everyone is ready to go. What better way to start a module than talking about business and financial planning? So starting off with section A, this section is intended to help producers understand if selling to schools is a good choice for their farm business, as well as their family and farm goals. It reviews whole farm planning, the process for it of selling to schools that was presented on in the introduction. Selling to school markets requires producers to be proactive in their planning and in understanding their costs. If it doesn't look profitable on paper in the planning process, chances are it won't likely be in the field or in reality. So as such, we will review a few tools to assist producers in the decision-making process. So the first slide here, slide 5 of the Facilitator Guide on page 82. This slide is just a review and another prompt for producers to review the channels they are considering for school sales and to gauge if their goals still align with this based on what they have learned so far. All right, but now sort of getting into the meat of business planning. We're looking at Facilitator Guide pages 82 through 84. And on this slide are the slides for 6 through 9. And these include a discussion on business planning and financial tools for producers. So here we want to help producers understand how to calculate the break-even price for their product and the return on investment for assessing school markets, especially if changes in infrastructure will be needed. There are numerous models and software programs available for producers, many of which you may be familiar with, and they are identified in the workbooks and online. Many producers will have an idea of some of these, but this will give producers an opportunity to develop a clear understanding of production costs, their break-even price point, and the time frame of their return on investment when selling to schools. This information can also be used in creating a cash flow statement, which is really critical for farms to align their monthly expenses and gross sales with the school year or their payment terms. These slides and the corresponding producer workbook on page 35 also includes a series of resources to use to make these calculations. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. On slide 10, this is one of the case studies, the first one for module 4, and it involves Kat Becker from Cattail Organics in Wisconsin. This case study is an excerpt from a podcast, and while it's not the greatest audio quality, Kat has some really great insight into price point in this excerpt. She mentions in this podcast that they first considered trying to compete with distributors on their pricing, but that the farm doesn't do that in general anymore. She does good record keeping on cost of production and the profitability of each crop grown on the farm. And the farm's prices would be considered very high by wholesale standards. But Kat mentions that the food services directors that she works with are happy to pay more because there's little waste. Lettuce is a good example of this, in which baby lettuce mix at $7 a pound is what she's selling it for, but virtually none of the product is thrown away. The food service director at her school district that she's selling to has said that they can expect to throw away anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of the product from a distributor. So Kat suggests that this is something to consider when trying to distinguish your products from the products that the food service director may get from a distributor. And then we move into an applied activity. This is worksheet 4A. Business planning considerations for school sales. This is based on the break-even price. So we want producers to spend about 15 minutes on this applied activity where they can work in groups for peer-to-peer learning opportunities with similar enterprises to use the tools linked in the presentation to find their costs of production and break-even price for specific enterprises. If the producer perhaps already has a product in mind and knows some of these numbers, then they may want to work individually, but we really want to encourage this sort of cohort or peer-to-peer learning. And then looking at the next slide, this is actually what the worksheet looks like in the producer workbook, worksheet 4A. And if producers seem overwhelmed, there's a lot of data that has to go into this. That's okay. We want to really remind them of a couple things here. And first is that this is no easy task. Developing an enterprise or crop budget can be challenging and may take several years to develop because it requires a lot of historical data and record keeping that some newer farmers, beginning farmers, may not have been keeping track of starting off. Additionally, there are, if you're growing many crops or have several different enterprises, that this can also be a challenge trying to do all of this at once. So ideally, we want to encourage farmers to start with maybe one, possibly two crops in a season, see how that goes, and then continue on. But trying to do it all at once is going to be very challenging. The second component that we want to just sort of remind folks, as they may seem overwhelmed, is that as they look at their enterprise costs and budgets, there are always costs that they don't think about, these unexpected costs that we just don't figure into our budgets. And so in working on a budget, it's a good idea to add a line item to cover all of these unexpected costs. And generally, we refer to this as a contingency line item. And in many cases, farmers will take their overall operating budget and add 20% onto that to cover all of these unexpected costs. Another way to sort of look at this that I've worked with some producers who will invest in a piece of equipment or infrastructure, they will take the total price, the purchasing price of that purchase and add on an additional 10% to their yearly budgets just to cover their operating expenses and maintenance that, again, they're just not planning for each year. For example, if I'm looking to purchase a $20,000 greenhouse to sort of scale up in order to sell to some school districts, at 10%, I may take $2,000 each year, add that into my operating budget just to make sure I have that money there to cover any maintenance or costs that I just haven't thought about in addition to the purchase price. All right, so we went through that rather quickly, but again, there's lots of tools and worksheets within Module 4 to really focus on helping understand these break-even price, understanding cash flow, and understanding the return on investment. I just want to take a moment and see, I'm not able to see the chat, but if there's any questions before we go on to section B, please feel free to unmute yourselves. All right, well, hearing none, the next section of Module 4 is section B on scaling up, meeting the increased demand for school markets. Sections B through D can actually be a separate training in and of themselves as they really dig deep into these topics depending on the audience. So starting off, slides 13 through 14, which are in the Facilitator Guide, pages 85 through 86, is starting to understand scales of production. And so in these slides, we want to discuss how different market channels will affect the scale needed to meet the demand of the market, and how important it is to ensure the farm is solid in its production skills before scaling up to sell to schools. One way to do this is by evaluating the weakest link that is preventing the farm from succeeding or managing towards its goal. And this is an opportunity to do a deep dive into the root of a problem. So in a few slides, we're going to talk more about the weakest link and sort of the impacts that can have on scaling up. But before we get there, we want to talk about slides 15 through 17. And these slides will help producers understand generalized factors that can lead to successful or possibly some heartburn when scaling up to sell to schools. Certainly, labor is one of those really important considerations and one of the biggest expenses for a farm business. So looking at slide 17, some of you may want to spend a little extra time on this and consider adding even extra slides or information related to state-specific labor laws. I'd also like to add, in looking at slides 15 and 16, that as educators and technical service providers, we like to stress that a farm or any business should be profitable at their current scale of production before considering scaling up. However, in my experience in working with farmers, I find that most of them scale up in order to manage towards profitability. I'd also note on slide 16, on the bottom there, it says scaling up will affect, and there are 4 components listed for scaling up. And for me, these sort of define what scaling up really aligns to, that it's just not always an increase in acreage, which is tend to what we think about, but it could be an increase in herd size. It could be an increase in the number of enterprises on the farm. It could also be just the number of markets that one's adding to the farm business. But one of them that's not listed there as well, and I feel is important for scaling up, is also just being more efficient and better within current farming systems. So we may have a system in place, but even if we're able to just tune that up a little bit, we can increase our yields, increase the quality, increase the volume, as I just mentioned, yields. But you know, those systems are already in place, so we don't really have to add much more to the farm to access these school markets. All right, and then they're on to slides 18 through 20. And this is page 87 through 88 in the Facilitator Guide. And these focus on school-specific considerations for scaling up, including school requirements for consistency and grading, packaging, labeling. These considerations are really important for successful relationships in farm to school, while also stressing the importance of clear communication channels between all parties that may require certain systems be in place for communicating these aspects. And on the ATRA website, we have a tutorial on scaling up that has a lesson specifically to understanding some of these requirements that really relate to intermediate markets and schools for grading, packaging, labeling, and things along those lines. And next we move on to risk management, which is a loaded topic, but you know, to keep it just to sort of the focus here, slides 21 through 22. This is the first introduction that Tammy's going to sort of dive more into in terms of food safety and some of the regulations farmers need to be aware of in selling to schools, as well as some of the risks involving insurance and some of the legal components as well. And looking at slide 22 here, there's an example of an ATRA publication we have on understanding crop insurance, which is a lot of changes have happened over the years and something farmers should really start to consider in terms of risk management, regardless of size or scale of production. I see Farm Commons there, which is a great organization to provide legal information and resources for farmers. Everything from labor to different types of channels and markets, a really great resource. And then I also just see Flip Insurance there. That is just a program primarily for value-added products. So something to make sure farmers are aware of as well if they're producing value-added goods. And finally, as we wrap up this section on slide 23, we want to remind producers that scaling up may not be necessary depending on the school. Scaling up requires careful cost calculations, as we've mentioned, to understand the rate of return and to see if it actually pencils out. It may be valuable to have conversations about scaling up for multiple wholesale or intermediate market channels, not just school sales. Also, there are several wonderful trainings, such as Atina Diffley's Wholesale Success, that may replace or even coexist alongside this particular section. All right, so now back to the weakest link, and this is an applied activity. Worksheet 4B on page 39 of the producer workbook. And the goal here is for a producer to identify the one and only one weak link on their farm that is holding them back in their current or future production for school sales. Everything else that is identified are considered adverse factors. And while they are problems identified from the producer that can be addressed while still working on within the school markets, we really want to focus on the one and only one component that's holding them back from moving forward. And I really like this quote here from Alan Savory and Jody Butterfield. One and only one weakest link accounts for the strength of the entire chain, regardless of how strong other links might be. To strengthen a chain, one must always attend first to the weakest link. Other links, also known as adverse factors, no matter how frail they appear, are essentially non-problems until the weakest link is first fixed. So this is an opportunity to stress the importance for producers to monitor their decisions and progress throughout the season. And this can allow for any quick in-season adjustments that may be needed so as to not jeopardize the contract a producer has with a school. So I know we had a slide earlier of some of the weak link examples, but I just want to take a moment and open things up to see if any of you could mention what you see as some possible weak links that could prevent a farmer from accessing school markets.
Please feel free to unmute yourself. And then I don't know if some of our, like if Jenny Lee or some other folks can shout out what's in the chat, because I can't see it because I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, we have lack of refrigerated transportation as one, logistics, so ability to deliver to several schools.
Communication is one that I hear frequently, that farmers are just not very good about returning phone calls and being good communicators.
We also have not understanding liability issues and food safety regulations.
All right, any others? These are really great. And I know that the Kentucky group in the breakout talked about refrigeration and transportation as being a weak link for them. But again, this is an opportunity to really dive in deep to the root cause of something, and not just looking at, for example, dealing with certain pests, but why are those pests there, and how can I manage better, and what is that really related to, and what's that telling me, and the impact it can have on my sales. All right. So next we're moving along to section C. And section C is very specific to crop producers and crop planning. Tammy's going to follow up with section D, which is more for livestock producers. And so we encourage you to pick and choose these parts of the curriculum based on the type of producers you're working with. And if you have a composition of both, consider breaking out by enterprise type to really meet their needs. So starting off this section, we have another producer spotlight, Living Root Farm, located in Montana. And this, the video link, the video is completed. We just need to insert the video link into your resources. So we'll make sure to do that. But in this video, they discuss season extension tools and how to utilize succession planting to satisfy school agreements. So again, I mentioned we're going to have to put the link in, but I'll say that this video after the scaling up section can have a myth busting effect on scaling up. Living Root Farm is a small family farm in a rural area of Montana, and they explain how they have worked with their school district and their farm to school coordinator to sell foods for the salad bar and harvest of the month program. All right, so now we're diving into some of the tools for crop planning and record keeping. And so slides 27 through 29 on your facilitator guide, this is page 91 through 92. This is when we dig into how to use school contracts and agreements to develop a crop plan. And as with enterprise or financial planning, production planning is critical in meeting the needs of school markets. It involves first understanding the needs of the school and then working backwards all the way through the production process in order to figure out the what, where, when, and how the producer will meet the needs of the school. So understanding what crop am I growing, when am I growing it to meet the school's needs, where is it going to fit in my field, and what do I have to do to harvest and prepare it for delivery to meet the school needs. So as mentioned earlier in this module as well, if it doesn't work on paper pre-season, then chances are it won't work in the field. That is to say, it pays to plan. Keep in mind that planning helps manage risks. Crop growers need to plan for things like crop loss or even bumper crops, while livestock producers may have challenges associated with processing dates and the impacts that can have on animal weights. So next we have one of our first sort of examples here of a crop planning tool. This is called Ag Decision Maker. And this was developed by Iowa State University Extension, Craig Chase. And he developed this tool for producers to evaluate marketing outlets using whole farm records. Now, whole farm records are records generally kept for tax purposes and for a farmer to fill out what is known as their Schedule F each year. And it can be used to evaluate various marketing outlets, especially when a producer doesn't have detailed crop or enterprise records. Producers can use this spreadsheet or this tool to evaluate different market outlets based on their potential contribution to the overall farm net income. So then the next sort of group of tools we want to share are through Johnny Selected Seeds up in Maine. Many of you may be familiar with them, but they have a growers library that has great resources for crop planning. And we're going to show you this here in a moment. Tammy's, looks like you're bringing it up. So it's under their planning tools and calculators. And they include calculators for things like seed starting and transplanting dates, succession planting and harvest dates. And keep in mind that harvest dates is the starting point for crop planning. And then, as I mentioned earlier, working backwards to planting, to seed starting, and even to how much seed I need to order pre-season. So as Tammy's bringing up the calculator, we're going to look at the succession planting calculator from Johnny's here. And it's an Excel spreadsheet. All right, thanks, Tammy. So we chose this calculator to share with you today because succession planting is so critical for crop producers for selling to schools and to have a consistent supply. And I just want to mention there's sort of two general ways to achieve sort of this succession component. One is by staggering the planting dates of the same variety of crop so that you're planting at different times, or by planting different varieties of the same crop that have different maturity dates. So for example, if I'm looking at red peppers to sell to a school, there's a variety called Ace that takes 70 days to mature, while a variety known as Olympus takes 85 days. So I can use different varieties to stagger my plantings to help meet this continuous supply for my school contract. But looking at this spreadsheet, there's a couple things I just want to point out. First is the far column, column M, which is your sort of last planting date. And I think it's important to just really understand that that date needs to reflect your location or your region. So if you look at now line 30 on the spreadsheet, you have an opportunity to incorporate a farm's first frost date in the fall. And so by inputting this date, then that reflects within column M to really know that, okay, if I put these numbers in, it's going to show me I can plant up to this date in order to meet my harvest needs. However, I know where I live that that's not possible due to my first frost date. So that needs to change. I just need to be aware of that. But overall, these are really great tools. You know, they're open source, available to growers and educators, but really just to utilize these to really understand how much I need to be growing to meet these contracts and how that reflects within the schedule for my harvest and deliveries. So sort of in just finishing up here, we're going to go back to the slide deck. And on page 42 of the producer workbook, this is an applied activity where we can focus on working with some of these calculators. And so this is an opportunity for producers to use these tools to fill out the worksheet. And you can go through the example on page 42 using these calculators. But again, it requires possibly some knowledge of data if they haven't produced yet, but also knowing that there's a lot of information that can go into these, but really give you the information you need to manage towards these contracts in your farm goals. So on that note, I'm happy to take questions, but then we are headed into section D, which is based on livestock planning. And Tammy's gonna tackle that one.
Before I get started, feel free to unmute or put some questions in the chat of what we've covered thus far, which has been a lot. So we understand if we're feeling like if you're feeling a bit fire hosed here. All right, without hearing anything, any questions or hearing anything from Jenny Lee in the chat, thanks for managing the chat, Jenny Lee. I'm gonna move on to section D, which is the counterpart to what Andy was just talking about with the crop production planning and moving into the animal protein production planning. And again, as Andy mentioned earlier, section D obviously should be used with if you have an audience that is predominantly made up of livestock producers. And if you have a producer audience that has both livestock and crop farmers, then you might want to consider breaking those groups up and doing kind of like side-by-side overviews of both section C and section D. Of course, that would require more people power and such, but it would help in reducing the time and having producers not spending a bunch of time learning about crop production planning when they're livestock farmers. So something to consider for sure. So this section really starts out with an activity, which is basically an opportunity to gauge the room and get livestock producers really considering how their products will fit on the school plate. It is meat and livestock products are typically the they are the most expensive part of the plate. So just asking them probing questions and having them get that menu out again and really thinking about how their products fit on the plate. And then moving into slides 33 through 37, you start to really dig into that and focusing on the key concept of versatility and cost, because that is a major consideration for most school districts. So, as they're looking at that menu, where are there opportunities for what they're producing that can feed into the school district's need for costs, economy, and versatility. And as we discussed or as Margot discussed in Module 3, the school capacity and needs will also dictate how much and in what form that livestock product will take. So for example, does the school have freezer storage? In this slide here, in determining school needs, you can see there's the patty, so that school probably doesn't have a lot of school capacity and they just want frozen patties. So and then in this last slide, we want producers to really think about that production planning piece, but from the livestock producer perspective, just thinking about tools for capacity and profitability when it comes to marketing your livestock to a school district. And this next tool I'm gonna go back. So this slide 37 has a screen, not a screenshot, but a link to this Compass toolbox. And this is a really great toolbox that not only ties in that the production planning piece, but also what Andy was talking about in section A, but that cost of production based on a specific market channel. So for example, you could put in schools for this in the toolbox, and it is also in the form of like an Excel spreadsheet, and understand what types of profitability you can expect with your particular livestock product. So it really enables farmers to make strategic decisions based on real data that hopefully they will already have rather than just some kind of instinct, like, I think this is going to work out for me. So we really encourage you to utilize the Compass tools. And it's not only for livestock, but also, as you can see here, they also have a veggie toolbox and a grain toolbox if you work with grain farmers. So you can use this particular resource in the training, depending on the type of producer you're working with. So yeah, in this final slide in this section, we briefly touch on egg production. And this is a topic you may actually want to expand on if you have a producer audience that is really interested in this. So we only have one slide on here because we could have gone into a lot of detail regarding egg production. So you can see here, there's some information on the facilitator prompt that you could actually expand into 2 or 3 slides in this section. And then another thing I wanted to mention about this would be a really great opportunity to work with a producer that is selling local eggs to schools and trying to elevate that producer and have that producer identify how they're handling all of the questions that are and talking points that are on this slide. So definitely encourage you to find a local producer for all of these, but this particular one would be great. And then the livestock production planning piece, as you can see, it's pretty, the slide numbers are pretty limited, but it's really meant to get producers thinking about their capacity and the type of product they're going to try to be selling to schools, and then spend the bulk of their time going through this worksheet on page 45 of the producer workbook. And as you can see we have the accompanying facilitator guidance here. And we say that, you know, if you spend about 20 minutes on this activity, because you might need to get folks situated with that compass and the Compass tool. And another tool I'll be talking about in the food safety section is working with your meat processor. And then also how to figure out how much meat you can expect from a carcass. It's an embedded link. So that might be something that you would want to consider bringing up and having producers work through for worksheet 4D. So again, we don't have a ton of content for the livestock piece because mainly we want folks to be thinking about their capacity and product assessment for the livestock products they're interested in selling to schools. So any questions about this section or comments? All right.
Tammy, there was a couple comments just noting that they've seen farmers running into issues with schools only wanting pre-cooked meat as a barrier when it comes to meat.
Wow, and that's a significant barrier in terms of processing, because that would be something the farmer would need to work with a processor to have that level of processing might be cost prohibitive. So that would be maybe, and you're thinking about the cost benefit analysis, that might not be the best situation, and trying to find school districts that have, going back to module 3, where Margot was talking about school and kitchen capacity, where there's just a little bit more school and kitchen capacity for folks to actually do some cooked meat. So, okay, I'm going to navigate over to sorry, you'll have to forgive my phone ringing in the background. I haven't figured out how to turn it off, so sorry about that. So we're gonna start with section E, which is navigating school food safety standards. And food safety and producers' inability to meet the school food safety requirements was identified as a top barrier in the needs assessment that Carolyn talked about on the first day. And if you can think back to that, to day 1 here. And we wanted to start this section off with a forthcoming myth busting video, which also has a written case study to help illustrate that schools don't have an obligation to follow standards that are more strict than the state and federal requirements. The confusion around the different types of food safety standards and certification on the part of producers and buyers doesn't help with this misconception on the part of producers. So in this section, we don't want to dig into those like very specific details of food safety standards. Rather, we're just trying to explain the differences of different produce safety standards and certification and meat processing safety standards. So I am going to play my video. So I got it in my slide. And come over here.
We're really lucky that Common Ground is located only about 6 miles outside of Beacon. We're also very conveniently located right next to where one of the school district's bus depots are. So they are able to come and pick up directly from us. And that saves us a delivery to the school. It means also that because they pick up earlier in the week, we are able to split our harvest date so that we're harvesting for the school districts earlier in the week, and then we're able to do our weekend market harvest towards the end of the week. It makes it really convenient for us, and it has really allowed us to provide for the schools on a rolling basis. Our food service director, Karen Pagano, is also on our weekly wholesale list. So she's able to see produce as it becomes available each week. And even if we're not able to fulfill the whole order, we're still able to supply some portion that we can showcase or provide something for our taste tests or the Vegetable of the Month program. We also will plan ahead of time for larger orders like our lettuce delivery, which we do in the beginning of the spring and also in the fall. And so we're planning ahead. We know exactly where that produce is going to go, and it's not diverting or in any way impacting our other wholesale or retail outlets. And in this way, it's really allowed our school district relationship to complement our wholesale practice rather than divert anything away from it.
All right, well, that was a different excerpt, but Erica also talks about, and here, I'll get to sharing my screen again, but she also, and we have 2 excerpts in our, in the slide deck, you can see that here. Let me get back to, and I must have copied and pasted the wrong slide or the wrong video. So forgive me for that. But she also talks about how they work with their school district in their county, and they've actually been able to come to an understanding with their food safety standards. And she also highlights a really great resource that they've developed on food safety standards and kind of navigating the legal issues associated with that. And it's a great farm-based resource. So moving on, after producers listen to that video about Common Ground Farm or any other state or regional farm that you would like to highlight, facilitators will talk about some common food safety requirements. And as a reminder, the School Food Authority may not have a specified requirement and may lean on the federal or state food safety standards. So every school is different, and this probably isn't news to you. Important things to point out in these two slides, slides 42 through 43. Also, you can follow along on pages 97 through 98 of the facilitator guide. Schools that set specific food safety requirements or vendor qualifications will communicate them in their solicitation. So as Robert mentioned and talked about in that solicitation packet, we actually even looked at the solicitation packet and the food safety standards that Durango, Colorado solicitation outlined. So that's kind of an example of what that would look like. Also, just be sure to remind in your presentation, remind producers to review any state-specific food safety standards, and also just kind of become familiar with some of those federal standards, or just, collaborate with some folks that are more experienced on that, with that on the at the state level. And a lot of times those folks would be at the Department of Ag. And this might also be a really good time to plug the direct to school sales, because many distributors may require, especially the broadline distributors, they almost always will require some kind of GAP certification. So we'll talk about that here next. So in this slide, we share some of the commonly used acronyms and what they mean for producers that want to sell to schools. So if producers actually understand the differences in these certifications and regulatory programs, it will help them better communicate with school buyers. So this section also touches on the different standards and certifications. So that includes that federal food safety standard administered by the Food and Drug Administration, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and it's called FSMA for short. And FSMA is pretty broad, actually very broad, and doesn't just focus on produce, but we encourage you to kind of highlight the produce piece. And that is also highlighted on page 46 of your producer workbook. And then gaps. Remember, somebody shout out, remember we did this with Jeopardy. What is GAP? Come off audit and
good agricultural practices.
Woohoo. All right, good agricultural practices. And that's a voluntary produce safety certification that is verified through an independent auditor. And a GAP audit is often required for selling, like I mentioned, selling to broadline and even some regional food distributors. And so it is voluntary, but some schools may require that. So it's good to know what that means. And then finally, we suggest at least some familiarity with HACCP, or Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. Try to say that 3 times fast. HACCP is a procedural system, mainly for food processors, that also includes meat, to follow to ensure their procedures are in place to avoid people from getting sick. And there are certifications and trainings for HACCP, but most folks that are outlining a HACCP plan are required to do that as part of a federal or state inspected facility. So, like a meat processing facility or something that is has a lot of value added facility. So again, this can be omitted if you are training mainly crop producers for slide 46. And, in the facilitator guide, you can follow along on page 99. The same goes for those slides that are focused primarily on produce food safety. So you can pick and choose. So most meat producers will be taking their product to a state or USDA processor. And here we refer producers to that ATRA, and really great ATRA publication titled Working with Your Meat Processor. And that provides communication tools to get the cuts that a school might be interested in. And Margot mentioned that earlier, being able to communicate with them and understanding what cuts a school may require. Some schools have a ton of capacity and are able to even take whole or half animals, whereas it's more likely that you'll need to, get patties or at the very least ground into 5-pound quantities. So just being able to understand what the school district wants, and then communicating with your meat processor is an important tool for producers that want to get for producers that want to sell their meat products to schools. So definitely check that resource out. So we understand how in-depth food safety trainings can be, and we suggest that instead of spending a ton of time on food safety, even though it was identified as a barrier in the needs assessment, we suggest that you refer producers to some of the amazing resources that are available in most states within your region. And just have a familiarity with the state-based resources that are available. And many of you have extension folks on your team, and some also have certified produce safety trainers through the Produce Safety Alliance. So those folks, if you don't have them on your team, it's good to consider at least enlisting them to help with this piece of the training. And then also just to at least have them talk about some of the state-based training programs that they have. So producers can at least get familiarized with food safety requirements. So as I mentioned, in Montana, our produce safety trainer is based out of the Department of Ag. I'm sure that's not the same for every state, but something to make sure you find as you're preparing to train producers. And then if you don't have a ton of resources in your state, I'm going to plug NCAT's ATRA program. We have on our website, which is listed here in the slide, we have a great webpage on food safety. And it includes tutorials, videos, as well as podcasts and all sorts of other tools for helping producers understand food safety requirements and just assessing their risk. So another great resource that I wanted to elevate is from our friends over at the Oklahoma Farm to School program. And they, this resource is also, I know Jenny Lee is going to be pasting this into the chat, but it is also available. We encourage you folks to check it out. Actually, I was just gonna, I have it right here. So I wanted to share this resource with you. And it is really, it's focused on, it's got information for schools and for growers. This is the growers section. And there's just so much great food safety resources for you all to look at and download and help your producers understand how they can become educated on the food safety requirements of schools. So definitely encourage you to check that out. Okay, finally, the activity related to this particular section is mainly a risk assessment. So let's all turn to page 48 of the producer workbook. And I want all of us to kind of look at this together. And as you can see here, what we want producers to do, and many producers that you're working with may actually have already gone through a risk assessment tool, but this is basically outlines the different production practices that really similarly follow the GAP and the FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act requirements for produce safety. And so we want producers to think, so if we look at the first thing on the first row here, water for irrigation. So one of the risks here is human pathogens can be introduced into water and contaminate produce during growing activities. So if you have if you have surface water, that producer is probably going to have a higher risk than somebody that is on a municipal water system or a ground water system. And I think most producers are going to be familiar and be able to write what their mitigation strategy is here. And so another thing I'll say about actually all of our worksheets is they are, if they're accessed online, they're fillable PDFs. So a producer could just fill in their mitigation strategy and then actually print that off and share it with the school to help them understand what their mitigation strategies are for the risk. So it's a pretty cool resource for all of our worksheets. So as with the other modules, trainers, you folks will prompt producers to use these assessment questions. And we really hope that producers at least understand that break-even price point or begin to understand how to figure that out, have started thinking about that weak link if they're going to need to scale up their farm, and then understand how to develop a production plan based on a solicitation, and then finally be able to communicate their food safety practices with the school food authorities. So at this point, we just would want them to check in with that. And if they need to fill in some of these pieces, make sure they write that on their action plan. And this is just a summary of the different case studies that we've done for this particular module. But again, they are these case studies, as is demonstrated from my my guffaw from the Common Ground Farm. They are larger case studies. Usually the videos are about 20 minutes and they talk about a number of issues. So yeah, we definitely encourage you to check those out. And then, well, it's not, this particular module doesn't really work with the regionalization piece. It's more based on different types of enterprises. So you might want to consider highlighting based on the producer audience that you're working with, the different enterprises that different producers that are working with those enterprises and selling to schools. So that would be another way to differentiate in terms of for this particular module. So with that, I am going to here's our information, and please feel free to reach out to Andy or I with questions or comments, or if you need to get connected in your state. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions. Oh, I see that. Where do we find information about group gap audits? Samantha, I will actually put a resource in the chat after after I'm done answering questions here, because I'm not really great at multitasking, which might be clear from my presentation today. There is a really great resource from the Wallace Center, and they have a great information on how to work with like a food hub to do group gap audits, and basically it's like a roadmap to doing a group gap audit. So I'll make sure that information is shared in the chat. Any other questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute and all right. Well, I'm gonna have, I think it's Tomas, that's our MC for for the rest of the afternoon. Tell us what's next.
Yeah, thank you to you both, Tammy and Andy, for that really informative session. Up next, we'll have a little longer break, about a 15-minute break. We will be back at, how about 3:32-ish Eastern time. So we'll meet you back here around that time, and then we'll be jumping into the conclusion. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're coming back together, and I'm going to go ahead and get us started with looking at the conclusion. So wrapping up all of the pieces that we've talked about today in this conclusion. So we are going to be on page 101 of the facilitator guide and page 51 of the producer workbook. So we should already be close to both of those pages from the end of module 4. So the facilitator guide for the conclusion, just like all the other modules, right, includes a brief overview of the conclusion with the curriculum outline and some background information, including digging deeper resources. So most of the conclusion is really about action planning and sort of wrapping up that action plan piece with producers. And so the digging deeper into core concepts resource there for you is an action planning resource from Vermont Feed to check out. You'll also see the link here where you can click and download the slide deck, again, to customize as needed. So if we just look at the curriculum outline very briefly, it really includes 3 main sections. So it includes an overview, an action planning section, and then a section for the post-training evaluations. And the materials needed, you'll see in the furthest right column in the curriculum outline or the training module outline. The materials that are needed is the action planning guide, which is in the producer workbook, and we'll look at that again, as well as a postcard for the final activity that you'll be doing with producers, as well as those post-training materials. All right. So if we look at the next, I guess, 2 slides over, looking at the learning objectives. So this is slide 3 on page 102 of the facilitator guide. And the main objective, as I already mentioned, of the conclusion is for producers to really use action planning as a tool to identify motivations and goals, next steps, resources, and context for successfully entering or expanding into school markets, right? So we've been sort of naming this multiple times throughout the training, and the conclusion is really the space for producers to have that additional time to look at their action plan, get their questions answered, figure out what those next steps are, and really using that action planning guide resource in the back of their producer workbook to tie all of these action planning pieces together. So on slides 4 and 5 of the conclusion, still on page 102, this is really to provide an opportunity for you to talk about the goals of the conclusion. So for producers to finish their action plan and to complete the post-training evaluation. But it's also a good time to just recap the key takeaways and content that they've learned throughout the training. So there are talking points on page 102 for slide 5 that summarize each module, but this should really be adapted to reflect what you actually covered in your training, and maybe an opportunity to revisit some pieces that might need to be revisited based on producer feedback or any remaining questions that they may have. So after the training recap, the next section really dives into wrapping up action planning. And if you look on the next slide, slides 7 and 8 of the facilitator guide, which is on page 103, is really providing that structured time for producers to look over their action plans, make edits to their action plan, ask questions, and then build in some opportunities for small group and whole group sharing. So, and depending on the size of the group, how much time and what level of support producers need will really dictate how much time is spent here. So this is really for you to decide the time that producers may need to still go over their action plans and then share as folks are interested. And again, we just really encourage trainers to feel comfortable in building in more time here as needed, right? As you're sort of hearing from producers, if they need more time with their action plan, this is sort of where they can come back and visit it. And so again, just to remind folks, right, the action plan, it's in the back of the producer workbook. And so we'll just pause a second and turn back there. Let's turn to page 55 again of the producer workbook. So this is where throughout, right, we've been flagging that producers are revisiting these check-in questions at the end of each module and sort of assessing how they feel about these learning objectives, if they've been met, if they still have questions, if there's still gaps there. And then adding in those next steps and strategies for each module as they go through. And so the action plan table, again, is on those pages 56 through 60. And that's where that's where producers are filling in the action plan table as they go along. But then finally, as I mentioned yesterday, there's a tying it all together table on page 61 of the producer workbook. And this is the final page of the school business action planning guide. And this corresponds as well with slide 9 of the facilitator guide on page 103. So you'll see this table here. And again, so there's that time at the end of each module to review the end of module check-in questions and fill in the action plan table as they go along. And then this tying it all together table really attempts to pull together the components of the action plan and the learnings from the training into one spot for producers. So you'll see the table includes a column for producers to identify which market channel they're most interested in pursuing right now or expanding into right now. So direct to school, they may have a local school in mind already, maybe a food hub or a distributor that they're interested in working with. And so just encouraging folks to or producers to identify which market they're most interested in pursuing immediately after the training. And of course, choosing one doesn't preclude any of the others, but it may be helpful in terms of figuring out what those next steps are. And then the next column includes the values pitch, right? So we heard about this and practiced this in module 3. So having them jot down, what makes their product different or unique? Why should schools be interested in purchasing from them? And this pitch, of course, may vary depending on what market channel they choose. And then the following columns after that ask producers to identify those key resources, key next steps, key products, and key partners that are needed to move forward with school sales via the market channel that they've identified. And ideally, these resources and next steps and products and partners, et cetera, will have already been more or less identified in their action plan table. But if there are still missing gaps and producers are having trouble identifying their market still, they're having trouble maybe identifying the products they intend to sell, or maybe what those immediate next steps are, then it's really an opportunity for you as trainers to encourage them to revisit and review relevant content areas with them from the training, or help them identify important additional contacts in their state, or maybe even experience farm to school farmers in their state to sort of further those conversations and figure out what their next steps may be. And I did just want to note, this is sort of a brief overview of the wrapping up the action planning guide, but for a deeper dive into supporting trainers and using action planning, we did record a training where we go through an example of the action plan table and tying it all together table. And we also in that training hear from 2 farms. So we hear from Fire Ranger Farm in California and Rolling Branch Farms in Georgia about how they both use informal and formal goal setting and action planning to sell to schools. So that's a great video to check out for some additional support about how to use the action plan with producers. And so that video has just been dropped in the chat. So take a look at that as you have time for some more information about using the action planning guide. All right, so that's really the section about action planning and supporting producers and wrapping that piece up. And then the conclusion sort of transitions into a final activity. The send a postcard to yourself activity. So this is on the bottom of page 103. So the thumbnail image for the activity is incorrect, but it's slide 10 at the bottom of page 103. So we recommend some sort of activity that celebrates the end of the training, right? And that can support producers with holding themselves accountable and keep those sort of connections and motivations there to follow through with their action plans. And so the suggested activity that we have here is for producers to send themselves a postcard that will arrive at some point in the future, so maybe a year later. So producers will be asked to address a postcard to themselves with a goal or vision for where they see themselves in a year. And as trainers, the idea is that you'll collect them and mail them at a later date. And so, also time permitting, you may want to ask producers to share their goals, to share what they put on their postcard with the whole group or in small groups as they feel comfortable. So this activity will likely take 10 to 15 minutes, and the instructions for this are at the bottom of page 103, as I mentioned on slide 10. So I wanted to pause. Are there any closing activities that you've done similar to this in terms of trying to sort of maintain accountability and sustain motivation and continued learning? Are there any closing activities that you've done in your trainings that you've seen be really successful, especially with producers? So feel free to drop in the chat or just share verbally. Love it. Accountability buddies. Great idea. So maybe encouraging folks to share contact information and check in with each other at some point in time. Great. Well, if others have folks have ideas to share, please do as we move along. Oh, I just see developing a farm profile to share with buyers. Oh, I like that. That's a great idea. Yeah. Great. So yeah, so really the last piece of the conclusion is the post-training evaluation piece, right? So you want to keep the producers in the room and try and get this post-training evaluation done. And I already mentioned this yesterday, that we're going to hear more about this tomorrow from NYU, but just wanted to flag again that those post-training survey prompts are at the end of the conclusion. Right, and there are actually 2 post-training evaluations. So one that occurs at the end of your training, as soon as you're done with your training, and the second about 6 to 12 months after the training. And so the post-training link is listed here on slide 12 on page 104 of the Facilitator Guide. And it's also in that evaluation protocol guidance that's adapted for virtual settings that's located in your workshop materials folder that I pointed to yesterday. So again, you'll get more info about this from NYU tomorrow, but just wanted to flag that there. And there's a lot of great info we'll hear about tomorrow related to evaluation. So hold your thoughts or questions about that till then. And yeah, it's kind of a hodgepodge of wrap up in the conclusion, but that's a total wrap on the curriculum. So we really hope that the last 2 days has given you a good sense of the curriculum content, and that you feel more prepared to begin adapting content to your producer audiences, and have some ideas of where to plug this curriculum into the work that you're already doing, or planning something new in your state. So I'm going to pass it to Lacey in just a minute for to take us to our next breakout. But any questions about the conclusion before we go into our next breakout? Great. Well, thanks for hanging in there, y'all. I know it's been a long couple days and getting into the evening, but I'll go ahead and pass it to Lacey for our last breakout time together today.
Thanks, Jenny Lee. And yeah, and I echo that. Thanks to everybody. We know that it's a lot of content, and we know that we're really just giving you this big picture overview, and hope that you feel like you're leaving with the tools to be able to kind of go back and know how to navigate it. Because we know that it's a lot to dive into and a lot that you're going to want to take and customize. But in our next breakout today, as well as with all of our focus tomorrow, is really going to be thinking about those next steps and what this can look like and bringing it to your state. So we're going to have a next breakout for about 25 minutes. We'll come back into the main room for some closing session and discussion briefly at about quarter after the hour. But in the next 25 minutes with your states, we want to really start thinking about where can this apply to your state. So what are the existing potential trainings that you might bring some of this content into? Or what are the existing convenings or events that producers are already gathering at that you might be able to add some of these modules or some of this content to? Or if your state is in that place and some folks in your state are interested in doing so, what could it look like, and how can you start thinking about when and where a potential local producer standalone training might be? So thinking about all of those options and how they might come to your state. So we're gonna have some time for brainstorming there. That's gonna be the main focus for the team. And then as you have time, we also have the opportunity to return back to our trainer action plan and dive in a little bit into understanding the content. And this is a chance to just do a little bit of a check and review on the content that we've covered, and making sure you know some of those basic content pieces to be able to move forward and know how to navigate. So your facilitator will check in and make sure that you have the information you need to be able to navigate it moving forward. So I think we are ready, Tracy, to break out for one more state team conversation for the day.
All right, folks, welcome back. We made it to the end of day 3. Thank you all for staying with us, and thank you for all of the time and energy you've put into these last 3 days. For now, we're going to do another check-in. I'd like to give you all some space to share any ideas, any thoughts. Really just take this time to add your reflections of the day, and then also a more direct question. Is there a place where you're considering your state is considering having or integrating a producer-led training at? And we'd love to just know some of the examples that you all have drummed up in the last breakout session. So feel free to unmute yourself or share in the chat. All right, seeing some good examples in the chat. The KY Fruit and Vegetable Conference, January 2022. The Pick Tennessee Conference of February 2023. Any other events, conferences, maybe some that are maybe unconventional, or yeah, we would love to know what you're thinking.
In Florida, we talked a little bit about the nutrition incentive program that we have here and how expansive their producer list is. So when they have to do the required training to become a vendor for doubling SNAP, we could also tag on some information about Farm to School Day.
Great, super interesting.
Kentucky, the Kentucky group kind of talked about a lot of different types of conferences and how maybe some of the modules might fit well into those different conferences. So we talked about like the fruit and vegetable conference. The Center for Crop Diversification holds a fall webinar series. So even if it's just like that intro to Farm to School, that would be a good module. And then we can potentially direct people to future trainings. The OAK Conference, which is the Organic Association of Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky Small Farmer Conference. We do some grower buyer meetups. There's the KSU Small Farm Conference, the UK Local Food Summits, System Summit, and then KDA and KDE host some trainings. So we came up with a lot of different opportunities. I don't think that we would hold like a full-fledged, all of the modules at once, but that's like a really good place to have a captive audience and at least start the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I agree, Tiffany. I agree. All right, well, not seeing any other. Oh. So Tessa, if you don't mind me sharing, I can share your comment in the chat. It said, my head is still in the meeting I had, but I had to pop out and back from what was about racial equity challenges and extension. And it just left me sitting and how BIPOC farmers in our area are structurally excluded from farm to school on so many levels. Just would love to hear more from other states who have ways to address this.
We have an organization in Kentucky called Black Soil that is an association of Black farmers. And I have actually reached out to them, and they have partnered with UK on Center for Crop Diversification on some other things too, to try to make our programs more inclusive and reach those folks.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. And Cindy shared KSU Small Farms Conference is an opportunity to connect with BIPOC growers. Excellent. Well, thank you for those contributions and sharing those thoughts. As we're wrapping up day 3, tomorrow we'll be concluding the workshop, and we'll have one more special guest. The producer from Need More Acres, Michelle, will be hosting our virtual site visit tomorrow. So it'll give you another opportunity to connect with a current producer who is engaged in Farm to School and ask her just as many questions that you like. She'll be available to us for an hour to share her thoughts, her experiences, her challenges and successes, and then answer any questions you all may have. So thank you again for your time and energy these past 3 days. we'll revisit this topic tomorrow. Take care now.